Alright, so welcome to lesson 4, which is on transforming objects. The first thing we're going to do is to go ahead and open up the media file in lesson 4. So I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Open. I'm going to navigate to my lesson files. I'm going to go into lesson 4, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up the file that's called l4start1.ai. So l4start1.ai, and go ahead and hit open. And there you can see that I have my demo file to work from. And the first thing we're going to do is just add a new artboard. We looked a little bit at artboards in the previous lesson. We're going to look a little bit more at that now. The first thing we're just going to do is go to the artboard tool, which is towards the bottom of your tool panel. It's the one that kind of looks like a square with some hash marks outside of it. And I'm going to select that, and I can just simply click and drag to create whatever size artboard that I actually want. It's very similar to drawing an object. It gives me those same width and height measurements. And that's it. I've created another artboard, or you can kind of think of it as a page, although that's not exactly what it is. There are some differences. If you want to duplicate the artboard that you just created, you can go ahead and you can go up in the control panel, and you'll see again it's context sensitive. So since we have the artboard selected, we just created an artboard. That's what we're seeing up here. And if we want to just create a new one, we can go ahead and hit that new artboard button. And it automatically creates a clone of the artboard that we just made, and you can click to place that artboard wherever you'd like it to go. Alright, and the lesson takes you through a lot of ways to resize your artboards and change them, and so you can explore that further on your own. And now we're going to start talking about transforming content. Illustrator allows you to move, rotate, reflect, scale, and shear pretty much anything that you can draw, especially vector objects. And one of the ways that you can kind of, as you're working on your layouts, as you're working on your designs, a really useful tool is your ruler. And actually, before I get too much ahead of myself, the first thing I should have done when I opened that media file is go ahead and do a file save as. This is a really good habit to get into. It's a habit that I do just at the beginning of my work day, even if I'm working on an ongoing project, is I'll go ahead and do a save as version so that if something happens to my file, if it gets corrupted, or the work that I did that day wasn't what I wanted, I always have something to go back to. So I'm going to go for this, I'm going to go ahead and say File, Save As, and I'm just going to call mine Demo, and I'm going to save mine to my desktop. And again, you should save yours to a place in your hard drive or your flash drive that works for you. You can go ahead and hit save. And again, we're just going to say OK to the options. And again, alright, so let's now move on to transforming content. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work with our ruler. And the ruler is a really useful thing because it allows you to actually create guides. So it allows you to drag guides out on your artboard so that you know where to place your guides, or where you to place the items that you want to lay out. So to draw a guide out, if you want to draw a horizontal guide, you can go ahead and click anywhere in your ruler and just drag down, and wherever you let it go, there'll be a guide there. If you want to create a vertical guide, you can go ahead and grab from your vertical ruler over on the left-hand side of your screen, drag it wherever you'd like it to go, and let go. And you'll see that guides, if you have multiple artboards, guides will go across multiple artboards and over top multiple artboards. So again, it's a useful way to kind of be able to lay out your guides once you have created a guide. if you go to your guides menu, or I'm sorry, your view menu, you can go down to guides and you'll see there's an option there called lock guides. If you go ahead and unlock your guides, you can actually move them with your selection tool to wherever you want them to go. So in case you haven't placed them in quite the right spot, you can move them to where you do want them to be. And you'll see that initially my guides were locked, which is why I wasn't able to move them initially. So you can move them once you have them in the right spot. You can go ahead and go to View, Guides, and then Lock Guides. And now we're going to move on to scaling objects. The first thing I want to do is go ahead and edit my preferences. If you're working on a PC, you're going to find your preferences in your edit menu. So you're going to go to Edit, and then you'll see an option called Preferences, and then you want to go to General. I'm working on a Mac, so my preferences are actually located under the Illustrator menu. So if you go to Illustrator, Preferences, and then we're going to go to General. And one thing I want to make sure that's clicked on is I want to scale my strokes and effects. For me, it was already turned on. Depending on how your setup is set up, it may or may not be on. So I want to make sure, again, that my scale, strokes, and effects are clicked on. Once I verify that, I want to go ahead and say OK. And so what that's going to do is it's going to scale the stroke width of any object scaled in the lesson. So, you know, we learned in the last lesson that the stroke is the outline around an object. What we did by making sure that it's going to scale the stroke, that is if you have say you have a 2-point stroke on an object and you scale it to be half the size it originally was, you're going to end up with half the size of your stroke, or a 1-point stroke. If you make it twice as big, if you make the object twice as big, you're going to scale that stroke too, so it's going to end up with a 4-point stroke. So again, you know, having those scale options are useful because depending on how big or small you make your object, your outlines are going to remain proportional. So that's pretty useful. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to select with our selection tool this sort of yellow circle. And I'm going to, if I'm on a PC, I'm going to Alt drag. So I'm just going to hold down the Alt key on my keyboard. If I'm on a Mac, I'm going to Option drag this into this other artboard. And so that way we've created a clone of that object on the artboard that we just created. And I'm going to make sure that this is still selected. And I'm going to go to my toolbar and go to my scale toolbar, or my scale tool, and double click that to get the scale option. And I just want to sort of preview how this is going to change as I scale into and out of, or as I scale this object larger or smaller. And one thing you want to make sure, and this is true of a lot of dialog boxes in Illustrator, you want to make sure that the preview is clicked on. So that way before you commit your changes, you can actually see what changes you're going to make. And this one I'm going to do a uniform scale, and I'm just going to change it to 50%, so it's going to be half as big. And so when I do that, you'll see that it actually scales my object down. And then I want to say OK to commit the changes. And so you'll see now that I have a wheel just like the one over here, it's just half the size, and it also scaled those strokes down to be smaller as well. And actually I'm going to get rid of these guides just so we're not distracted by them. So let me go ahead and delete these guides. And now we're going to move on to another object. So you'll see that I have a bicycle as one of the assets in this document. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut this bike. So I'm going to select the bicycle. I'm going to go Edit, Cut. And I'm going to go ahead and paste the bike into this artboard. So I'm going to go ahead and say Edit, Paste. And I'm going to put this a little bit in. Actually, let me go ahead and I'll put it on this artboard down here. And then I'm going to say edit copy. So I'm going to have that same bike selected. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to do edit paste in front. And so this isn't going to look any different, but what I've just done is there are actually two bicycles there now. So there's the bicycle that I originally created, and then I copied and pasted an exact copy of it in front. And now I'm going to choose the reflect tool. And the reflect tool is located underneath the rotate tool, which is the one that sort of looks like the backwards circle. Or the keyboard shortcut for it is O. And I'm going to click on that front edge of that bicycle to set my reference point, and then hold my shift key down to constrain how it rotates. And I'm going to go ahead and click and drag down so that now I have that second copy of my bicycle that's actually rotating. Alright, and let's move on to shearing and sort of creating a drop shadow essentially. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this extra bicycle that I have, and I'm going to select the one that I have remaining. I'm just going to move it down here to save a little bit more real estate on this artboard. And then I'm going to zoom in a bit as well so you can see this better. So now I'm going to go ahead and select the bicycle. I'm going to go to Edit, Copy, or Command C on a Mac and Control C on a PC. Then I'm going to go to Edit, Paste in Front, and I'm going to go up, and where you have the Scale tool, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Shear tool, which is located underneath the Scale tool. And I'm going to go ahead and set my reference point for this to be sort of between the tires of the bicycle, since that's where I want the bottom of the shearing to happen, or the sort of the fixed point. I'm just going to drag a little bit to the left, so essentially like drag where that shadow would end up being. So I'll leave that there. Again, this is something that, you know, if you were doing this for a project, you would spend a lot more time sort of finessing exactly what angle you want it to be on. And then I'm going to change the opacity for this object in the control panel. So if I just go up to the control panel, right now it's at 100%, I'm going to change it to 20. And then I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back, so it's behind it. Now if I unclick from this, you'll see I have a pretty believable sort of shadow for this vector object. And again, it was very easily created just by using, just by cloning the existing object, copying it, pasting it in place, and then selecting it, shearing it, and changing the opacity. Alright, those are the high points of Lesson 4, Transforming Objects. Please make sure that you go back through the lesson, that you complete all the steps, and I will see you next week in Lesson 5.